Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of Tugboat Talks. On today's podcast, we have a great conversation with a good friend of mine named Jim Jackson. Jim spent the majority of his life as a part of the Mormon Church, and in recent adult years had decided to vacate his position with the Mormon Church and exit that denomination. Um, in this conversation, we discussed the differences between the way that he was raised and the way that I was raised as an evangelical preacher's son. We also discussed some of the reasons why he left and some of the things that he was uncomfortable with in that sect of Christianity, and then the social impact on his life exiting that community. So, as always, like and subscribe. And if you enjoy these conversations, share them with your friends. We really enjoy having these tough conversations, and we like sharing them with the world. So do us a solid, like and share, subscribe, and follow along for more. Hope you enjoy it. Have a great day.
All right, so welcome to another edition of the podcast. I am joined tonight by my good buddy Jim Jackson, who is a former co-worker from previous employment days. Good friend of mine who has very different political opinions than I do, but a very interesting circumstance in that, Jim, you grew up as a member of the Mormon Church, correct?
Yeah, I was raised in the full name now is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They're trying to distance themselves from Mormon.
Oh, okay.
That's the latest.
So were you in that at the, like, from the time you were born, or did your parents go into it at a certain age?
They they joined the church when I was 3. So pretty much all my life, I've got vague memories of a time before Mormonism. But as I say, I was 3 years old when they were baptized into the church.
Okay, so when your parents were baptized into the church.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's I don't know a lot about the Mormon Church. So, like, I was born and raised Pentecostal Christian. So what is it that makes the Mormon Church so different from what I was raised in?
Well, there's three different. There's lots of offshoots of Mormonism, but for the purposes of this, let's just stick to mainstream Mormonism.
Sure.
That's the one that everyone's familiar with. You know, they get the missionaries going around the doors,
Right.
knocking on people's doors, stopping people in the streets, that sort of thing. But Mormonism is such a broad spectrum because there are other offshoots of it that stem from the founder. The founder obviously was a man by the name of Joseph Smith. But you have like the Warren Jeffs branch of Mormonism. He's currently in the jail for marrying 12-year-olds. That is the FLDS, the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. But they are offshoots of Mormonism. But even within mainstream Mormonism, you have cultural Mormonism, social Mormonism, and doctrinal Mormonism, which is probably the same for any church. But in Mormonism, it's especially pronounced. The social Mormonism would be the social gatherings amongst the members where although they do say to be in the world but not of it, Mormons typically socialize primarily with other Mormon families and with other Mormon people. So that would be social Mormonism. Then there's the cultural Mormonism, which is the Mormonism as it exists within a Mormon church or within a Mormon chapel, I should say. And that would be where you find people have their own take on it, their own spin on it, so much so that certain things that are not doctrinal Mormonism become cultural Mormonism. An example of that, certainly for me, and it differs from, unit to unit of the church, or even within families, it can differ. But for me, a big one was Coca-Cola. Mormons don't drink tea, coffee, alcohol. They don't consume tobacco.
Okay, so hold on for a second. So is that a belief that so what is the belief that surrounds that as to why you wouldn't
Well,
drink tea or coffee, we'll say?
the tea, the coffee, the alcohol, that was all laid down by Joseph Smith. That is doctrinal Mormonism.
I mean,
That is,
alcohol, I understand because it's an intoxicant, right? And that's very similar to how I was raised. But, growing up in our church, everybody had tea before bed, for God's sakes.
well, I mean, we're with that, it was laid down by Joseph Smith, who was the founder, and he came out with what they called the Word of Wisdom. And it actually says within the we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but I'll try and explain it without confusing the issue. Within Mormonism, you have the Bible, you have the Book of Mormon, and you have the Doctrine and Covenants. The Bible being the Bible, the King James version of the Bible.
Okay.
No arguments there. Then we have the Book of Mormon, which was a book supposedly translated by Joseph Smith from gold tablets that he found in the side of a hill that were shown to him by an angel. But the Doctrine and Covenants, you could actually read the Book of Mormon and know nothing about Mormonism as practiced. That's a curious thing about it. But the Doctrine and Covenants would be like modern day revelation. And within that modern day revelation, don't drop it, would be the Word of Wisdom. It was.
Now, listen, sorry, my dog is here.
Oh, that's what it is.
Yeah, he just ran downstairs. Hold on a second. All right, sorry about that. Continue.
So the Doctrine and Covenants, the Doctrine and Covenants is modern day revelation, supposedly, written by Joseph Smith. So although considered modern revelation, it's from any time from 1820 to 1840. You know, it's fairly archaic. But within that is the Word of Wisdom, where it was announced, although not by commandment but by instruction, that people should try to refrain from tea, coffee, alcohol, and tobacco. That has since become doctrine now. That is one of the rules of the church, is that you don't drink, smoke. But coming back to the cultural Mormonism, growing up for me in the church, my parents were of the opinion that Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or any caffeinated drinks were also against the Word of Wisdom, although not against the letter of the law, but against the spirit of the law.
Okay, so you grew up in a very stringent household then, in that case.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, as did I. Now, we were allowed to drink Coca-Cola. You know, I wasn't allowed to watch certain cartoons. Like, were you restricted in, you know, content in that capacity?
Very much restricted. You know, in the UK, the movie ratings are different from what we have here in North America. So you have U, which is universal. You have PG, which you have here. Then you go from PG to 15, and then from 15 to 18, and 18 would be an R. So R-rated movies were absolutely, you know, off the table. A movie that would be rated R, but, you know, cut for TV, yeah, maybe, depending what it is, depending what the themes are, and depending what age it was. Certainly not before I was 17. You know that.
Well, but I mean, that's, you know, like I think I was 15 years old before I went to a movie theater.
Yeah.
Right, you know, growing up as a Pentecostal preacher's kid, so I grew up in a very stringent household as well. Like, wasn't allowed to watch Care Bears because that was witchcraft. Like, you know, just
No, I was allowed Care Bears. Care Bears was okay, but anything, you know, if I was sitting watching a show in the evening and somebody cursed, well, that show was off. That was it. It was done.
right, and you know, very similar for me as well, right? So what I'm interested in is, obviously, since then you've left the Mormon Church. At what age how long ago did you leave?
Well, it's a funny one, because growing up in the church, I remember at a very, very young age thinking, something's not right about this. This doesn't add up in my mind. Um, I've always been, you know, I've never been good at doing what I was told.
Big surprise there.
Yeah,
Maybe that's why we are friends.
But I was never good at that. And I remember at a very young age having a lot of questions. And it was always put down to, you know, being inquisitive. And I was very knowledgeable about the church because of that. And I tried and tried and tried to, because I saw people around me who believed this 100%. There was no question in their mind. But I never ever got it. You know, it never 100% gelled with me, and I wanted it to.
So did you feel that way about spirituality as a whole, or strictly the Mormon Church?
Um, I don't think I really separated the two in my mind until I was probably approaching adulthood.
Okay.
But growing up in the church, the Mormon Church is very family oriented. You know, they want everyone to be having as many children as possible. Everything is about the family. Even the doctrine of the church is about the family being an eternal construct. You know, and families can be forever.
Okay,
That's
that's an interesting belief that I've never come across before.
that's one of that's probably one of the main beliefs. It's surprising that we haven't discussed that. And that's why Mormons they have their chapels, they have their meeting houses, but they also have temples. The closest one to you would be in Halifax.
So I find that interesting because even though we don't speak that way in our theology,
Yeah.
from from the Pentecostal or evangelical Christian church, I would be willing to bet that there are still people who think that you're. I mean, that's a very interesting question. Will your wife be your wife in heaven? Right.
Well, in Mormonism, the funny thing is with Mormonism is it makes sense in a lot of ways, especially when you've been raised with it. You know, you can look at it and think that's mental, but when you're raised with it, it does actually have a logical progression that does make sense in the sense of Mormons believe that we existed before we were born. We existed,
as like a soul or something.
yeah, as an intelligence, as created by God.
Okay.
God being God the Father and not God the Son.
Gotcha.
Because
Okay.
you get the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are three separate personages,
Yeah,
completely separate.
which evangelicals also believe three in one, right? Three separate but all together as well.
Yeah, the altogether part of it doesn't really factor into Mormonism, but
Okay, gotcha.
because I mean, God is God the Father, and then
The,
there is Jesus Christ.
the best way I've heard it explained to me is God is like water, where it could be ice, steam, or
Yeah,
liquid, right? It's the same thing, but in three different forms,
yeah.
basically.
Within Mormonism, God would be water, and Jesus would be ice, and then the Holy Ghost would be steam. So the belief is that we all knew one another in a pre-existence, a pre-earth life, and there was a plan that we would come to earth to be tested and to gain a physical body, and then eventually we would be resurrected as perfect beings. So you knew, within Mormonism, the belief is that you knew your wife and your daughter chose to be born to you as your daughter here on earth. You would
Interesting.
then
Okay.
you would then be born. You would go through the trials that life brings, be it physical, emotional, whatever.
So would you believe that all that is predestined? That your life is
Well,
planned out and you're basically just traversing it, or that
that
life happens
no,
to you
that
and
would
you.
be that's one of the questions that I always had. That it is not predestined, it is not foreordained, but God knows the decisions that you will make.
Yeah, okay.
So, although it's not written in stone as to what will happen and what you will do and all the bad things you'll do, it was known to God because He knows everything.
So what I'm really interested in is, me growing up as a Pentecostal preacher's
Yeah,
kid, growing up into church, socially a big part of the church, right? Played music in church. Grew up to university. All my friends were church friends. Same thing. You know what I mean? It's a very similar social construct and
yeah,
cultural construct to what you're speaking of. Even similar, um, even some similar sort of belief systems, right? When you get into the family stuff and the
yeah.
being a soul that existed before you were brought to earth and all that stuff, that obviously starts to get a little bit different. What I'm really interested in is what was it and what age was it? What was the realization that you came to that caused you to decide that probably wasn't for you anymore?
Um, there's no clear defining answer to that. I left Mormonism probably the first time in my late teens, and then rolled back around to it in my mid-20s.
So why was that? What was the motivation there?
Well, that's a complicated one. As I said, Mormons are all about families, and my parents were Church of Scotland before they were Mormons.
Okay.
Around 1978, they had a child who died. Then I came along, and then when I was 2.5, the missionaries of the church rolled around with the answers to these questions that the Church of Scotland minister couldn't answer,
Okay.
or couldn't answer in a way that my parents were willing to accept. So my parents were taught by the missionaries, and they became Mormons. And then around 1987, they had another child who I remember, and then he died. I remember being in elementary school when my dad came in to get me, to tell me that I was leaving school for the day because my brother was dead. Then there was a few miscarriages, and then there was another child born when I was 15, little girl, and then she died. And then another one when I was 18, and he died. So
And so all
when
these were like infantile deaths, were they?
oh
Or
yeah,
like,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
They came home and they lived with us. It wasn't like they were born and died. They were born and they seemed to be okay. And then they would take some sort of seizure and not come out of it, and ultimately they would die. And
Okay. So it was like some sort of pre-existing medical issue.
it's some genetic thing, yeah.
Okay.
But
So through that journey, your parents obviously had some pretty heavy questions that they then found
yeah, they
answers for in the
they had
Mormon
some heavy
Church.
questions, and they really threw themselves into the church because the church had the answers, um, even for that. So for my part, I think I cling to it. I would cling to it to try and find those answers, and to take that comfort from it that it offered. Um,
So what does it look like? Because obviously we don't have and this is very common for people to sort of evolve in their faith walk, right? Whatever it looks like. And for some people it's it's a break moment where they, you pull out that sort of we've talked about it before, about that
yeah.
house of cards, right? You pull out that one card and the whole thing comes crumbling down. And then for some other people it's sort of
If
like
it's
a like a natural distancing of, like, this doesn't really fit with where I'm at. And I understand that too as well. It was interesting. So the other side of that then is, how does life change after you leave the Mormon Church, with them having with that church having such a heavy focus on their
yeah.
social and their family aspects?
I almost left. I left Mormonism because I studied my way out of it, and
Okay.
I studied my way out of it using church-approved books and articles that were written by the church prophets. Now, the prophet is the head man. He's the president of the church.
Okay.
But looking over stuff that was written by previous prophets, and studying it and then researching it, I pretty much studied myself out of it. Um, what does it look like after, as a post-Mormon? Well, the first thing is, when you come out of Mormonism, it leaves you with the questions of spirituality, where if you come to the conclusion that Mormonism is not what it claims to be, as I did, um, when you come to that conclusion, where does that leave your other beliefs? Because if you come to the realization that Joseph Smith made it up and didn't in fact translate it from golden plates, and then there's the similarities between. Well, we're going off track here, but um, it leaves you questioning. Well, if that's not true, what is the nature of God? That was the sort of first question,
Okay.
and then where does Jesus Christ fit into that? And what is the Holy Ghost? Are these things even real?
Right.
And then when you find similarities between Bible stories and Buddhism and Egyptology and ancient Egyptian myths, you know, you start to then question, well, where do things fall? And I don't have an answer to that yet. I'm still working my way through that. I believe in something. I can't define exactly what that is. The biggest things that you see in leaving Mormonism is that people who you were extremely close to for most of your life, you're not anymore. And I don't know that it's me as a post-Mormon or if it's them as a current Mormon. It's almost akin to the Jehovah's Witnesses and the way they shun people.
Right, but like, I mean, I see that as well, even though they don't discuss it, but like you take a kid who grew up in the Pentecostal church and is a
Yeah,
homosexual, like that individual is systematically, even if unintentionally, ostracized from the church to where they feel so out of place that they're no longer a member anyway.
I think you've nailed
They're
it. I think that's spot on. That's exactly how it goes. I mean, there's some amazing people in the Mormon Church, and there's people who I care about, and I would do anything for them, and I'm sure if I asked them, they would do anything for me. But it's almost like an unconscious um, decision that they make to remove themselves from your company and to slowly stop including you in things.
right. Because
You know,
you're
and
well, because you're no longer a member of the tribe, right?
you're no longer a member of that tribe. I mean, we have family members who are still very active. Not my parents, I have to add, but there are family members who are active Mormons, more so in my wife's family, and there's just less interaction with them. Whereas in the past they would give you a call and say, "Hey, we're playing some board games tonight," or "We're having a barbecue," or "We're having a fire," or whatever. There's those things just slowly stop until they're non-existent.
So, a big understanding of most people's a big part of most people's understanding of the Mormon Church is the young, the young men who go on mission, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they call it, right? Go on mission.
Yes. Yeah.
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 And so here's one question: why is it only males who go?
It's not only males.
Oh,
There's
okay, okay,
girls who go as well. The girls tend to do a different type of mission, but they're still out there, and I've had interactions with them.
okay.
Um,
So, which is,
so
that'd be a common
yeah,
misunderstanding. Like,
yeah.
I've never seen a female Mormon out, doing the
You,
thing,
you
right?
you you probably wouldn't know them as Mormons. You wouldn't give them a second look. You would just see two, you know,
Well, I
20-year-old
seen two,
girls.
I seen two guys at Costco the other day, and I knew 100% they were Mormons as soon as I seen
Yeah,
them.
you got to look. Well, that was something that was always on the cards for me. My parents put money aside every month for me to go and do that.
So is that a thing that they're required to do, or is it a thing that they're encouraged to do?
Well, that's when it comes down to the cultural Mormonism versus doctrinal Mormonism. Culturally, especially in Utah or certain other states and certain places, even Lethbridge, Alberta, there's a lot of Mormons there. It's if you don't do it, it's talked about.
Mm,
There's a lot of pressure for these young men to go and do that, and I say men because it's the Mormon Church is very patriarchal. It says it's not, but it is.
okay.
Um, you know, the men are
Most
the
most churches are pretty patriarchal, though. All the
most
same,
most of them are, yeah. Well,
it's
certainly
getting
the
it's
Abrahamic.
getting it's getting better, but it hasn't been they haven't had a good history in that regard.
I mean, you'll never see a Mormon preacher, or no, they don't even call them preachers. A Mormon bishop who's female. That will not happen. I don't think that'll happen in our lifetimes. You'll never see saying within the Mormon Church, when men turn 18, they're ordained into the priesthood, well, the Melchizedek priesthood, they call it, and that gives them the power and authority to act in God's name. So any of the positions within the church are held by priesthood holders. Priesthood holders cannot be female.
So let's go back to the mission thing. How long does that typically
2
ensue?
years.
Sorry?
2 years.
2 years.
2 years self-funded.
And my understanding is that that's also, it's away from your home, right?
Yeah, it's typically, it could be anywhere, but like if you had served a mission, there's a good chance you would have served the other side of Canada or down in the States or Mexico, or could have been anywhere in the world. But yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And so what is their number one, their goal, and what is the, well, I mean, we already established that one big driving factor is the social aspect of it. But what is the mission? Are they in some sort of like enlightenment journey, or?
Well, there's two ways of looking at it. The first and foremost, the one that's most talked about, is that when you go on a mission, you are on a mission to convert people to the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
That's the first and foremost.
Which I don't have a problem with personally, but
the second part of that is that you are there for you to develop the testimony that you believe it's true. That is the hook, that when you have spent years saving up your own money to do this, and then you go and you do it self-funded for 2 years with limited access to, you can't just pick up the phone and call home.
why
You're
not?
not allowed. You're just not allowed to do that. You can call home at certain times, but until recently, it was once a year.
Really? So they
Yeah,
go for 2 years, but they're only allowed to call home once a year.
yeah. Usually
See,
Christmas Day.
So this is so they celebrate Christmas, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So this is this is where we're creeping into sort of the extreme side of it.
Well, it is extreme. It's I'm torn between my Mormonism experiences in the sense that I think without it, I would have been a totally different person than to what I am today. But a lot of the stuff that went on does bother me, and no tea, coffee, alcohol, fair enough, tobacco, fair enough, but going to a birthday party and not being able to have a glass of cola, not being able to go to the birthday party if it was on a Sunday, not being able to play rugby on a Sunday.
Well, listen, I grew up in a very similar way. I wasn't even at one point in
Yeah,
time. I wasn't supposed to ride my bike on Sundays, right? Like,
yeah,
and it wasn't because of what was right or wrong or what God thought or what my
yeah,
faith was. It was because of what some idiot was going to say in the church.
yeah. That's the cultural side of it. And Mormonism is very much like that. Mormonism is very extreme. It claims to have the solutions for everything. If all of life's problems, be they financial, spiritual, political, economical, in the grand scheme of things, the answers are found within Mormonism. Pray more, donate 10% to the church, get involved. It claims to have all of the answers, but
I mean, that on the surface is very similar to the majority of the Christian church.
it is, but it's very hardcore, and if you don't do it, there's a culture of perfection.
Okay.
I mean, whereas the other Christian churches believe in grace, you're saved by grace.
Depends on
Mormonism,
which denomination and which assembly, but yeah, I get where you're going.
but within Mormonism, it's based 100% on works, and everything from, you have sins of omission, sins of commission. You go out and you commit a sin, but you can also sin by omitting to tell the truth or whatever. Now these sins there's no difference between the sins in Mormonism and the sins in other religions, but there is a huge, huge culture. And again, it's not doctrinal, it's cultural, but there's a huge culture within Chapel Mormonism that nobody's ever good enough. It doesn't matter what you do, you will never be good enough. And the guilt that people have, and there's a couple of ex-Mormon Facebook groups that I'm on, and some people are just 100% hate on for religion in general. There's nothing constructive about that, I don't think.
Right.
But even with some of those people, the guilt that they feel for something as simple, especially on the female side, if a woman's wearing a tank top, the modesty thing, the guilt that's attached to that, the guilt that's attached to someone going out and meeting up with some friends and ordering maybe a mocha at Starbucks, which is coffee in it. And this is after they've left the church. And these people are still struggling with the guilt.
Right.
And the thing is, there is no hell within Mormonism. There are 3 degrees of heaven.
Okay.
Again, it comes from something in the Bible. I believe it was Paul who spoke about a third heaven. And it comes from that. But anyway, they believe that families will only be eternal in that top tier of heaven.
Oh, so you're trying to earn your way into the top tier of heaven so that you can do heaven with your family?
That's it, yeah. So the hell would be knowing that your whole. Imagine if Amy and your daughter they make it to heaven,
Well,
and you're
yeah,
in a pretty good place.
of course, me
But,
right now in this earth wants to spend eternity with my wife and kid, 100%.
yeah, but imagine if they make it to the top tier of heaven, but you were a bit of a dick and you've got to spend eternity with me.
Which is pretty possible, highly possible.
So there we go. So that could be, that would be your hell, is knowing that you could have done something different in this life.
Gotcha.
And
That's very
now,
interesting. And you
now,
could have been up there with them, we'll say.
yeah. Now, how would you feel if the thing that kept you out of heaven was the fact that on the second morning in Arizona we had a cup of coffee?
Right. Yeah. No,
You know,
I hear you 100%.
so
Well, listen. Here's another thing I want to get into just for a second. Is I want to tackle some of the myths or some of the conceptions about Mormonism. So, number one, so do they believe that there's a specific number of people who go to heaven?
no.
Okay, so I must have got that from somewhere else, or
The
what?
Jehovah's
What?
Witnesses believe. The
Okay,
Jehovah's Witnesses
so that's
believe
what I'm
in.
mixing up. And this is just an honest conversation for me, asking questions that other people would ask. That's all.
Yeah.
And then the other one is there. I think we had a conversation one time before about the polygamous side of it. Is there a polygamous side to it?
Yeah. Polygamy is a shelf breaker for lots of people, because for a long, long time it was taught within Mormonism that polygamy started with Brigham Young, who was the second prophet of Mormonism after the Mormons all fled to Utah State, or Utah Territory as it was then. It wasn't a state at that time. The truth of it
So what do you
is
mean they fled? Where'd they flee from?
New York,
Oh,
and
and why?
it was all to do with Joseph Smith and polygamy and sending men on missions for the church, marrying their wives, marrying their daughters, marrying women in secret and not telling anybody that it happened.
And they were kicked out of New York and they went to Utah?
Well, they went to Missouri first.
Okay.
And then when they were in Missouri, they sent out missionaries to the UK and to all over, and they brought converts back who then purchased hand carts and walked across the plains to Utah. And you can look that up. That's the Mormon pioneers.
Well,
And
once again, these are things that the majority of the public wouldn't know, right?
no, but I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of Pioneer Day.
No, I don't think so.
Certain states in the U.S. celebrate Pioneer Day, and that's what it's about.
Okay.
But that could be a whole other podcast for you, is the Mormon pioneers.
So let's get into the polygamous side of it. So back on track now with where it came from.
Back on track to polygamy. Yeah, polygamy did exist and sort of still does, but not in the way you're thinking. If within Mormonism you can get married, as you were and I was, or you can get married in the temple. If you're married in the temple, it's for eternity. But only Mormons can attend the ceremony. And to get into the temple, you have to be living your life a certain way, paying your 10% of your income, not drinking tea and coffee, and being a real hardcore Mormon. So you could go and you could get married in the temple. You're married for eternity. And then you and your wife divorce. And you apply to have or she applies to have the sealing, you're sealed to one another. So she could apply to have that cancelled. And it would be, but not in the eyes of the church. So let's say you and Amy get married in the temple, you get divorced. In the eyes of the church, in the eyes of God, you're still married.
Well, why? Yeah. So why are you getting married for eternity if you're getting a divorce? But anyway, that's a whole nother different.
Well, yeah, you're not planning on getting divorced when you get married, are you?
No, sure.
Yeah. So you would then, let's say you're getting remarried and you're getting sealed to another woman. You would be sealed to two women in the eyes of the church. So although you're only with one of them, you could be technically church married to two. And they're cool with that. That's all right. That's fine. But she can't do the same.
Oh, because there's a one-way street.
Yeah. So if she wanted to get married again, she would have to write a letter to the president of the church asking permission to have it all undone so that she could go and get married to someone else.
So you don't have a situation where people are actually living with multiple wives?
No, not within mainstream Mormonism.
No, okay. So is there like an extreme version of Mormonism where that
Well,
still exists?
The FLDS, and there's a number of different Mormon sects dotted around, some here in Canada actually, who do practice polygamy, and the men could have multiple wives.
Okay, but that's not you didn't grow up in that sort of a
No.
So you're not familiar with it, right? Okay.
No.
Gotcha. So before we're done, I'd like for you to unpack for me just some things. Not that I want to throw fuel on the fire, but I do want to understand why it was that you, as a young adult, I want to understand some of the things that you had issues with in the Mormon Church, theologically, not so much culturally or socially, but theologically.
I'll try and explain this as best I can, although it is quite deep. Because you would really need to really grasp it, you would need to have an understanding of it. I'll give you some examples. For a long time, Joseph Smith publicly denied polygamy. But now if you go and you look up the LDS Gospel Topic essays, you should write that down. LDS Gospel Topic essays. They're on the Mormon website, the Mormon Church website, although they are hidden, but you can find them through a Google search. There was things like Joseph Smith approached a 14-year-old girl and told her that if she agreed to marry him, that her and her whole family would be guaranteed exaltation in the kingdom of heaven. And if she refused to marry him, he would be struck dead by an angel that she couldn't see, but the angel was stood there with a sword, ready to kill him if she said no. So, that was one of the wives. Her name was Helen Mar Kimball. Then there's the discrepancies between what they teach versus what actually happened. The background story of Mormonism is that in 1820, Joseph Smith didn't know which church to join. So after reading a verse in the Bible, he went into the woods and prayed. And as he prayed, God and Jesus Christ appeared to him and said, "Don't join any of the churches." And that led to the start of Mormonism. Great, you watch the video and they teach you all about it, and it sounds great and it's amazing and it's wonderful. But when you scratch the surface, it turns out that there were at least 5 different versions of that first vision story, none of which were ever communed with anyone for about 12 years, until like 12 years after they supposedly happened. So there's the multiple versions and the fact that none of them existed. Then there's the story of the translation of the gold plates. The official line is that he was shown the plates by an angel, but he wasn't allowed to take them because he wasn't righteous enough. And he went back each year on the same day for 2 or 3 years until he finally was given the plates, along with a device to translate them. The device was called the Urim and Thummim, and that would allow him to translate these gold plates that were written in Reformed Egyptian. And he translated that into the Book of Mormon. And then it turns out that he didn't, in fact, use the Urim Thummim, that he used a shiny stone in the bottom of a top hat, and he put his head in the hat, and the words would appear on the stone. But you never taught that. That's something that was always promoted to me as anti-Mormon lies. And then you discover that they were, in fact, true. In the early days of the, hang on one second here. In the early days of the church in Utah, they practiced blood atonement for certain sins. That was all covered up. Brigham Young, who was the head of the church at the time, was not a nice man. Blood atonement being certain sins you could only atone for by having your blood spilled. So they would cut your throat in order for you to atone for your sins. When there's a young fella that refused to allow his fiancée to be married off to a man in his 70s, they cut his cock and balls off in order to spread the word and teach a lesson, and that was him having to atone for his sin of not sustaining his leaders. And there's any number of stories like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, and then, the truth of the matter is that when it comes to leadership in the church, like, humans really don't measure up. Anyway,
no, absolutely.
Right? Whether that's the Pentecostal church, the Catholic church, the Mormon church. I mean, every one of these churches, have a stain, obviously, on their reputation.
Well, they all do. There was another text in one of the Mormon books, and it was the translation of the Book of Abraham with a picture of a scroll and the translation of what those hieroglyphs were saying, and it was supposedly written by Abraham. Now, that was taught to me, and drummed into me from a young age, and then it turns out that it's actually an Egyptian funerary scroll, and the translation isn't even close to what it actually says.
Right.
Now, of course, when Joseph Smith got his hands on that, probably around the 1830s, nobody could translate hieroglyphics at that time, so he made it up.
Well, and what's interesting is that the one thing that I was going to mention, no, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to lose my train of thought completely. But it is, I mean, these are all things that nobody really knows about I guess, because, once again, you've got to be a part of the church in order to really know these things.
The issues with it for me are, as I say, they're very, very deep, in the sense that for you to really get a handle on them, you would have to know what I was talking about.
Well, you'd have to be part of the community. You'd have to be born and raised and really be like, this idea of intrinsic knowledge where only members of a specific group actually understand, right? And so, like, culturally and socially, you have to be inundated with it to even really understand the significance of it. And I can grasp that because growing up as a preacher's kid, 100%. Like there is still stuff like, you know, we weren't supposed to be dancing, we weren't supposed to be drinking, we weren't supposed to be whatever,
Loud laughter.
we weren't
No,
supposed
no
to be
loud
cursing.
laughter. You know.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, you know, no sex outside of marriage, which is still a very, you know, a very common belief, obviously, for the Christian church
Yeah.
and for evangelicals especially. Um, but no, it's interesting. I really wanted to sort of unpack, you know, how you grew up, what it looked like different, you know, what it looks like different. Sort of touch on the mission piece
Yeah.
of it, and sort of like paint a bit of an understanding of it, and then sort of dig into why it no longer fits your life, right? But you know, there in any religion, there's always these extremes and like social you know, negatives that are so much more heavier than the benefit that the faith walk is supposed to bring.
Yeah, and that's certainly true of Mormonism. There's a lot of things. A big one for me was, you know, having children myself, and when they got to an age where they started to ask me questions, and we would actually take them to church, and then it got with that. I just didn't feel right giving them the company line, as it were,
Right.
because I didn't want them growing up with the guilt that I know my wife suffers from, or suffered from.
So the interesting thing about that now is you know, you being raised that way, your wife being raised that way. I assume now you're choosing to not raise your children that way,
Yeah.
right? Do you raise them with any sort of
We answer their questions when they have questions. We talk to them about you know, church related stuff. We talk to them about Jesus. We talk about God. Um, but I want them to research and understand it themselves, and that goes for
yeah,
everything.
which
You
is
know,
the same way the same way, and I think we all want that for our children, but we want them to steer it in a positive light, you know what I mean, as opposed to like,
yeah,
I know for sure, like, even though I'm still heavily involved in the church, there's a lot of times in my life where my parents thought I was going way off the rails, and I
yeah,
was, right? I just so happened to sort of come back to it and anchor into it because I accepted who I was, and I somehow found a way to amalgamate that into existing as a part of the church, as opposed
yeah.
to conforming, and allowing that weight to sort of sit on top of me, you know what I mean, for my whole life.
I mean, at different times, you know, I've held positions in the church, positions of leadership in the church, and you know, I've interviewed people to ascertain their worthiness. You know, and that's interesting. You probably didn't know that about me.
No, that's well, you would be
But
you would be adequately qualified to
yeah,
provide judgment on another human being for what I know about you, for sure.
yeah. Um, but you know, it's a strange one, you know, because you grow up with it and then you walk away from it, and there's aspects that I just don't want for my children. Um, One of the things that bothered me was I read a quote from one of the Mormon presidents, and it was, "It's better that a parent lose their child to death than to lose their child through," I can't remember the exact wording, "immorality," you know, essentially. Now, I don't
But
know.
once again, it's this, you know, this extreme version of faith that
Yeah,
is detrimental as opposed to encouraging.
yeah, that's it exactly. You know, it can be damaging. It's, you know, it's amazing that I'm still sane, given what's happened and everything I've been through with, you know, loss and whatever.
It's
I guess
debatable anyway.
yeah, it's debatable. Yeah, it's open to judgment, but it's certainly given me a view on life that I don't think I would have had I not been raised with it. I think that I would have been a lot worse had I not been raised in Mormonism.
Yeah, me as well. With even with Christianity, so, you know,
Yeah,
there is that idea that, you know, was it, yes, it did some damage, but where is that middle sort of tipping point, right?
Well, that's it. You have to weigh that up. And I had some amazing experiences. The Mormon Church is all encompassing. You go to church on a Sunday, a Monday is family home evening, a Tuesday is youth night. Nothing happens on a Wednesday normally. Thursday night for me was attending a seminary class to learn about the Bible and the Mormon books, the Doctrine and Covenants, the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price. Learning about all these books and knowing them inside and out. Friday night would be some sort of family activity at the church. Saturday was, on your own, and it's Sunday again. Thursday night would be the night for meetings. So, when I was doing the Bible study stuff, my dad would be in a meeting somewhere to do with the day-to-day running of the church or, whatever.
Yeah, and you know what? I grew up in a very similar fashion. Sunday night was church, right? Tuesday night was prayer meeting. Wednesday night would be some sort of youth program. Thursday night would be women's ministries or whatever, you know what I mean? But really what it was these people, that was their community, and
Yeah.
this was just an excuse to get together with your community,
Yeah,
right?
and I think that's where the brainwashing comes in. And I think Mormonism is guilty of brainwashing. And again, I don't think it's Mormon doctrine. I think it's Mormon culture.
Right. Yeah.
But
No.
the doctrine encourages the culture.
Yeah, and I mean, there's any extent to that, because obviously we see a lot of that extremes in Scientology and Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, but even extreme versions of Pentecostalism, are very, very ingrained in their own community, right? And
Yeah.
and socially pressured and whatnot. But listen, I thank you for your time on this, because this is very interesting to me, and I hope it'll be interesting to some other
Yeah.
people. Shift gears for a second, because we are recording this podcast in the midst of the COVID-19 dilemma,
Yeah.
pandemic, which is obviously an unprecedented thing in our lives. And I know that I'll throw you under the bus here now for a second. I know that you're a big fan of Mr. Donald Trump, and I am not, and that's no secret to anybody. How do you feel that he is dealing with the COVID-19 situation?
I think he's sinking rapidly. And I
Man,
think it's going to damage his popularity. I'm not a fan of Justin Trudeau. I'm not a fan of the Liberals. But given what's happening all over the world, I think that we have got the very best person in charge, because he has a sense of humanity
well,
that is often.
you want somebody who's focused on the liberal agenda when the world goes to shit.
I think here's my thing. I think in order to be a successful prime minister, successful in the worldly sense, I think you have to be a little bit of a psychopath, because you have to be prepared to make decisions that are going to have a negative impact for a lot of people.
Do you know what we're going to do? We're going to do another podcast. We're going to end this one pretty much here, but we're going to do another podcast where we dig into all of your ridiculous theories.
My ridiculous theories. There we go. No, I believe in social responsibility, although I'm not a left-leaning.
Listen, I'm more than happy for the $2,000 a month or whatever it is Justin Trudeau is about to give me for sitting at
Like
home
I
recording
said,
podcasts with my friends.
as much as I don't like the man, I take my hat off to him for how he's dealing with this, and I think this may well be his biggest achievement.
The fact of the matter is that if we were in the same boat right now when we were American, we would be in a lot worse situation.
100%. Even the UK.
The UK as well?
Yeah, UK as well. Boris Johnson, I don't think I would have voted for him. I think he's just a little bit too much of a psychopath.
I like him because he's got crazy hair as well.
Well, he is crazy and he's mental, but I think he's too much of the old boys club in him.
You know, he's contracted COVID, eh?
Yeah.
And so has the
His other two advisors there, yeah.
no, the Prince, man.
No, Charles, yeah, Prince
Yeah,
Charles.
that's bad news for him. Although he got all the money in the world, so maybe he'll make it okay.
He'll be all right. Yeah.
Anyway, this will be a sorry disappointment for anybody who watched this thing until the end to hear us talking about Boris Johnson and COVID. But I do thank you for your time, my dear friend. You are a very, very good friend of mine. I value the conversations that we had late nights in hotels, you know, and I think that we'll have many more. So I appreciate it, and thanks for coming on.
Anytime, John. Have a good one.
Okay,
Take
buddy.
care. Bye-bye.